Welcome back, y'all. Welcome back to the Dat Way space, y'all. We have a very special episode for you all and a truly intergenerational dialogue. And I'm so excited to start us off and get us ready for this conversation. And so we're back in the Dat Way space, you all. I'm proud to introduce, of course, our shared community agreements, the criticality, the intellectualism, the identities and cultures, and the joy that define not only this space, but how we move in our classrooms, our educational spaces, our organized spaces, and beyond. Of course, we got to start with our Sankofa segment, presenting some history for this moment. Today, in today's history, let's take it global. And so on this day in history, two African nations, Zanzibar and Tanganyika, merged to create the United Republic of Tanzania. And so that was founded as a democracy, still going strong in Africa. And of course, also on this day in 1994, South Africa began its first multiracial election, which was won by Nelson Mandela, making him the first Black president of South Africa. Today, also in Black news, we have to give a huge shout out and a rest in peace to fallen comrade Harry Belafonte. In fact, tonight's song, I don't know if I want to play, I really want to play it. Y'all know we might get shut down, but I really want to play, of course, Banana Boat, Deo, and Jumping the Line, and 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot hut. So my Lil Wayne fans out there, you might be familiar with that, of course. But of course, we say rest in peace to Harry Belafonte, the Jamaican-American musician, actor, and human rights activist who organized demonstrations as well as raised and donated money to the civil rights movement. And globally, for instance, he's supported the South African anti-apartheid movement. And so we thank him for his courage and his consistency, his activism, and his authenticity. Rest in power. We also say rest in power to Rashida Williams, also known as Coco Dada, who is the third Black trans woman killed in Atlanta just this year. And we continue to stand against the transphobia and homophobia running rampant. And finally, as a word, we continue in this space, as you know, to fight against miseducation. Conservative miseducation and talking points are running rampant and taking over the Black community. From vaccines to curriculum to taxation, our community has been uninformed, underinformed, and misinformed. That miseducation is something we constantly fight against. And honestly, some Black outlets like the Shade Room aren't helpful. Black Republican politicians like Representative Donalds in Florida, Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court, Candace Owens all over Twitter are not helpful. White supremacist mindsets and respectability politics will truly be the death of the Black community. For example, the same intensity that we have in calling out, let's say, the Republicans down in Tennessee who expelled the Justins, we have to have the same intensity in fighting against, say, the Black Democrats who refuse to stand with them or call them out for not following the rules privately and publicly. We have to call out, for instance, the churches who are exposing and espousing classism and sexism and homophobia that are not in line with God. We must confront the ways in which Black people uphold white supremacy. And so that's what this space is about, you all, and that way we'll continue that endeavor. But let's get into our conversation, our main event for tonight. Tonight is all about history, of course, and tonight we get to celebrate living history and honor our elders. And so first up, before we begin, I want to begin with their bios. There's a lot of history right here. And if you haven't heard about these individuals, you got some learning to do. From the SNCC Digital Library, I want to, of course, give our shout out to that incredible instructional resource for our teachers. Baba Mukasa Dada recently turned 80 years old. Happy belated birthday. His bio reads, note, extremely radical, militant individual. In fact, that's the arrest card from his SNCC time when he was arrested. And it read just as that. He's been nicknamed the Reverend because of his fiery oratorical style. He's known also for his significant contributions to the rhetoric, mobilization, and emergence of Black power. Ricks first heard about SNCC in 1963 when Jim Foreman approached him after hearing that Ricks was a mighty militant. He went on to organize in Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi on issues such as voter registration and poverty. Baba Mukasa remained an ardent proponent of Black power and Pan-Africanism, especially the socialist movement in Africa, for years after SNCC. And then my comrade, Thandabantu Iverson. Brother Iverson is a veteran human rights activist, having participated in various social movements within the United States, including the Civil Rights, Black Student, Black Power, African Liberation Support, Vietnam anti-war, New Left, and human rights movements. In addition to his experiences in political and social movements, Thandabantu has also gained valuable experiences working in a number of U.S. occupations in different industries. He is a laborer, y'all, a health and safety organizer, for instance, in the SEIU, stagehand and decorator within the IATSE, coal miner and mine safety activist within the UMWA, auto worker within the UAW, steel worker within so many places, elementary and middle school teacher. This is why we can have so many great conversations about the classroom, among other positions. He also received his doctorate from the Department of Political Science at Clark Atlanta University. Shout out to CAU in 2007. His teaching and research have been primarily focused on understanding the intersections of race, gender, class, sexuality, and nation in the fields of feminist theory, African American political thought, labor studies, and human rights. Professor Iverson served as a faculty member in the Labor Studies Department of Indiana University from 1996 to 2014 when he retired. I want to welcome to the stage both Baba Mukasa and Brother Iverson. Welcome to That Way. Welcome, welcome. How y'all doing?
Doing
good.
Doing great.
That's great. Well, listen, I know tonight in our episode and space is called That Way, but I see that sign behind you, Mukasa. I guess it's SNCC Way. Tonight we are SNCC Way. So let's jump into our conversation. And if you both can chime into some of these next questions, and then I'll direct some to you individually. Talk to us about how you got started and take us all the way back to your childhood. I think it's really important for us young people to see and think about what our elders did when in their early lives that oriented them towards and prepared them for leadership in the movement of anti-racism. What was your child like and your early life like?
Well, cousin, well, if I can think back then, want me to run back 80 years, I try. I lived the average life and good life. Got some beans and cornbread every day, and that was good. Didn't miss a meal, I don't think, back in those days. My parents were from Alabama, and my mama worked for a quarter a day, and I would go down there and chop cotton 12 hours a day sometimes, and made $3 a day, like about a quarter hour, 20 cents an hour. And I was able to see people living in shacks and drinking water from wells and no toilet, no whatever, but the conditions. And in the town I go in Chattanooga, Tennessee, I pretty average. I went to school. I went to elementary school where I flunked, I think, 2 grades in elementary school. Then I went to junior high school where I was no longer interested in school. And so I soon started hitting the streets. I think I flunked in the 7th grade too, maybe flunked about 3 grades. And then I went to the streets and hung out. And then I got a job waiting tables for white folks. And start hanging out in the pool hall and that kind of thing. And that's basically the kind of life I live. And I was a pretty nice guy. I didn't get in too much trouble. Um, I and worked at a bowling alley one time with all the black kids, and we used to pick the bowling racks up. When the people knock them down, we pick the things up. And when we get down there to pick them up, white folk roll the ball at our heads sometime, and those kinds of things. But I lived in a segregated community. Rode on the back of the bus supposedly, go in the back doors, and then one folks say, forget to say yes sir to white folks and those kinds of things. You couldn't use the bathrooms, couldn't whatever, but we basically living under different levels of apartheid in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and that's basically the life that I live. But I got my greatest education probably in the pool hall when I was young.
Okay, and so you've had these experiences, I think, and it sounds like that many of our young black boys can identify with, of trying to find ways to navigate and even resist these communities and these conditions they grew up in. What was there a moment? What happened that pushed you from this description you're giving us into the work of organizing and mobilizing?
Well, when I was waiting tables and during that time, I was about 17. The sit-in movement started, the Freedom Ride movement started, and it caught my attention. And then when the students, three students at A&T, they sit down where white people sit in a Woodworth store. They called 10-cent stores back then. And when they sit down, they were put in jail. But when they put them in jail, that didn't stop the movement. That inspired the movement. And college students and students basically began to run everywhere and sit down in restaurants and go to jail, mass arrests all over the South and whatever. And that came to Chattanooga. And that in Chattanooga, it wasn't a large college community, but we had high school. So all the high school kids got together. Now, another point is that when my peers got to the 12th grade, I have a twin sister, and when they got to the 12th grade, I started hanging out at the school and became very popular in the school. And I think the school thought I was a student. I hung out there so much to get on the bus and ride home in the evening and whatever. And I became very popular. So when the city movement started, I became part of that group, and we went downtown and went where the white people go, sit down in their places, and they attacked us. And we fought with a mob attacked us, and we had to fight our way out of there. And we threw bricks and balls that night, and the next day we took thousands of people down there. All the kids went down there, and people from the community, and mobs of white people came. And we were fortunate enough to lead the first riot rebellion in the city and movement. And when we led the first rebellion in the city and movement, we got the attention of the NAACP, SCLC, and all the nonviolent organizations ran to Chattanooga to teach us about nonviolence. And at that time, C.T. Vivian and I was working together in Chattanooga. And at that time, all of them came there and taught us about letting people spit in your face, letting people slap you, hit you in the face, and do violent things to you, and you don't hit back. And I thought they were crazy. And when, matter of fact, the teacher that taught it to us, I said, well, if you tell me and us to let somebody spit on us and hit us in the face and slap us like you doing, let me slap you. And I went up there, and he said, come on and slap me. I slapped the hell out of that man. But from that day on, I became a nonviolent soldier and went across the South. C.T. Vivian immediately called SNCC as it was forming and called Snick and said, got this great, he thought I was the greatest man in the world, greatest young guy in the world, called Snick and told them about this great militant guy, this great civil rights young man, because I got put in jail fighting against the police chief, and I was out there preaching so hard. Matter of fact, CT gave me my first microphone and then gave me some things to talk about this police chief. I talked about him so bad that he sent the police out there to get me to take me off the mic and put me in jail. And when they put me in jail, I was hollering out the paddy wagon, go vote and go do this. And CT thought that was so great that he went to Miss Baker and to Ruby Dodge Roberts and Jim Foreman and those and said, this great guy, this great guy. And so they sent for me to come to Atlanta, and I reported, and the first person I worked with was Julian Bond, and my first assignment was licking a damn 1,000 stamps. I got drunk that night off of stamps. And but then I began to get other assignments inside of SNCC, but I came in as one of the most militant guys that they was looking for. And that led me to be able to, at some point, become a spokesman for SNCC and to be on all their demonstrations and protests and whatever, and gather history and reputation for doing that kind of work. And the SNCC people, when I came in, they saw me as C.T. Vivian's boy. That was their joke. It didn't have no meaning to me back then. But years later, I saw where they had gathered respect for me because I was connected to C.T. Vivian. He gave me such a high remarks and high recommendation. And that from there, after I came to Atlanta, I was assigned to the Albany movement in Albany, Georgia, where I went down with Charles Sherrod and SNCC movement in Albany, Georgia. And we had mass arrests where they put thousands in jail. And at the same time, thousands in jail, and they beat people. And we had a lawyer named C.B. King. They put us all the people out in a big old playground because they didn't have rooms in the jail. And the lawyer went to see about us, and they beat C.B. King. They beat him and beat a baby out of his wife's belly. And then at one point, as we in SNCC, we decided in that time that we were going to vote people out of office because that's the way to get rid of the mean white folks, mayors and all that. And that when we started to vote people out of office and started trying to register people to vote, in Lee County, Georgia, they burnt down 3 churches, and in Dawson, Georgia, burnt down 3 churches. They machine gun our houses in Dawson, Georgia, and in Lee County, Georgia. And we met a lot of violence, and our lives were in danger. That was in Georgia, but we also had people in Alabama where we faced terrorism in places like Selma, Wilcox County, Greene County, and also Bob Moses, who's also a field organizer like myself. He took a group to Mississippi, and we went into Mississippi, Greenwood and the Delta. We were going what we call black belt areas, and black belt just means the majority black people. And we were going there and out in them cotton fields and deal with sharecroppers and just bad conditions, people living in bad conditions. And that we would go out and tell people about freedom and liberation and justice and how they should be paid more and how sharecropping was wrong. You work a year and then they tell you owe money, and how the different forms of violence that they used on people, and the sheriff being a bully and forcing people to do whatever they wanted to do and get away with it. And we went up against that kind of thing. And when we went up against the sharecroppers and the farming and the register to vote, they shot us. Like Charlie McParker in Poplarville was shot in the head by a county commission. People that worked in the farms, like a lady named Fannie Lou Hamer, she was a sharecropper. They beat the hell out of her, put her in jail, and then beat the hell out of her. until her body swole all over, and that she had courage. Even after they beat her, she came out. They thought that was going to break her, but she came out of jail singing, "Go tell it on the mountain, over the hill, everywhere that freedom is coming." And she became a voice for the movement and a symbol. And then at Mr. Damon, they came to his house one night and started shooting because he worked with us and the NAACP worker. And they came to his house and started shooting one night, and he started shooting back and put his family out the back door, and they threw gas bombs in the house and burned him up and that kind of thing. And then you had in '63, you also had Medgar Evans, who was shot in the back after we had left a mass meeting uh, in Belzoni. They shot here. He came home, and a man named Dion McBeckwood had hit behind a tree, shot him in the back, and the bullet went through his back and went through the screen door. And matter of fact, the bullet landed in a watermelon, and that they killed Medgar Evans. And so we was facing terrorism. In the summer of '64, we brought in mass groups of people to help us, and they burnt down over 65 churches and killed other people. So we found ourselves in a state of war with public accommodation going in the front door and registering people to vote. But that was not the whole picture. We were talking about all the conditions that Black people face, all the injustice that Black people face, from jobs to housing to everything. And we put everything on the table, but we use voter registration as a way of saying, let's get organized and let's bring our people together. But we never saw voter registration as an end in itself. And so through doing that and being bombed and killed and registering people to vote and demanding people be able to register to vote, we made a national issue out of it. We attacked and went to the Democratic Convention in Atlantic City and demanded, and we had a mock election. We said, since the white folks, the Democrats and Republicans won't let us register to vote, we have our own election. Let anybody come to these election and vote, white, Black, whatever. And we had that election, and our candidates won. We ran against all the different established senators, white racist senators. Our candidates won. We went to Atlantic City and said, look, we had a legal election. They have a terror election. They have an illegal election. They use violence and terrorism against people. They put fear in people. And we demand that we be given these seats because ours was legitimate. And at that point, the President Johnson and all those guys, they say, we won't give you the seat, but we'll let you sit next to the seat, next to them. And we said, hell no. And we walked out the Democratic Convention and told them that Democrats and Republicans could go to hell. And we had formed our own party, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And when we told them we weren't Democrats or Republicans, Malcolm came and made it even more clear. He said, we ain't Democrats, we ain't Republicans, nor we're Americans. And Malcolm took it to another level and linked up what was going on in Mississippi with what was going on in the Congo and what was going on in Africa and what was going on in the Middle East and the world. Because he said, if you don't understand what's going on in South Africa, if you don't understand what's going on in the Congo and other places in the world, Vietnam or whatever in the world, you can't understand what's really going on in Mississippi. So Malcolm internationalized our movement. And I stopped there. Unless you want to
Listen,
raise my question.
no, this is brilliant. And first of all, Mukasa, you are name dropping for the people. You are really teaching them today, and I appreciate that. I mean, from Malcolm X to Ella Baker to Fannie Lou Hamer, Julian Bond. I mean, there's so many folks that we honor today. And that we who on whose shoulders we stand in this work. And one key piece that you're saying is that as a young person watching the movement, watching the activity, watching the freedom rides, for example, then inspired you to join. And we know that to be part of the story in the civil rights movement. We saw how the Greensboro sit-ins that inspired the Atlanta student movement, for example. We see that in the contemporary period as well, where the movement led by the Stoneman Douglas students inspires a national movement against gun violence. We see the Ferguson students and the Florida students inspiring an emboldened Black Lives Matter movement as an extension of a fight for Black lives over the centuries. And so this is key, that you are giving us a real sense of what it was to have these comrades and have this energy that then sparks more energy, that then sparks more energy and participation. And so, and I want to pause here. If run out of time here, I'm going to send one more link and then that'll be our last link, because y'all are preaching, and I'm sorry, I don't want the conversation to end. Brother Iverson, come on and get in on some of this, if you can. Take us back to your journey, and talk about this time period that you're growing up in and what that looks like for your involvement in the different movements.
Well, thank you very much, Brother Anthony. And so it's an immense pleasure to be on with both you and my comrade Mukasa. What's up, African? That's how we back in the '80s. When we were over at Atlanta University before it became Clark Atlanta University. Mukasa used to come over to our political science department on every Tuesday, and he would come in the door and say, "What's up, African?" And he was, for some of us it was cognitive dissonance, because some of us had already made that transition. We were thinking about being Africans, in people of African descent in the diaspora, but Mukasa was always putting on that pressure and encouraging us to keep on moving on.
You was running with Camus and Jamu and those, right?
I was with Jamu, Baraka, and Camus. Yes, we were there together. Moribo, Koromoko, all of us were. We were trying to become what we should have been, and we wanted to be steadfast in what we were beginning to do, to try to hold up the banner and to really continue to fight for liberation of our people. I was born in 1947 in Zanesville, Ohio. The son of working class parents. My father had come from Dawson, Georgia. My mother was from Zanesville, Ohio. And in the 1950s, my father and mother were engaged in a struggle along with other members of our community, our segregated community in Columbus, Ohio, for gainful employment. My father and mother were fighting, and eventually the struggle resulted in my father getting gainful employment as the first African-American bus driver in Columbus. My parents, very early on, as a result of their experiences, not only their life experiences prior to becoming married, but certainly after they got married, they had decided that they wanted to make sure that I and my sister, coming behind me 10 years later, would understand two things. One was, and I call these the two choices that my parents set before me. One choice I remember very distinctly, my mother set before me the day she came into the house with a Jet magazine. I believe I was about 10 years old at that point. And she called me to her side and she made me sit down and look at every single photo of the battered and murdered body of Emmett Till. Emmett Till was not that much older than I at that time, and he had been kidnapped, tortured, and of course killed. And my mother told me, and my father also backed her up. She told me, she said, "You must be a credit to your people. You must understand what has happened with Emmett Till, and you must make the decision to be a credit to your people. Always remember where you came from." That was the first choice that my mother and my father joined together in making for me. And it set me on a path
even though I was, I was still 10, 11 years old. Uh, a year or two later, my mother sat me down again. And this is where my consciousness raising, if you will, was becoming more complicated because very often, even though my mother and my father had fought together along with community members to make him the first African American bus driver, my father used to come home and beat my mother. And as a young boy, I saw this and I tried to stop my father. Well, my mother stopped me when I was about 12 years old. And she said, listen, she said, you can't do this anymore. I want you to understand, I love your father, but you must be a better man than your father has been to me. Those were her words to me. Now, this was complicated for me because I was, on the one hand, I was seeing them joining hands, and on the other hand, they were throwing hands. And it was a difficult and contradictory experience. But what it taught me was that what it began to plant in my mind was the understanding that being Black is not a simple matter of race, not a simple matter at all, and that in being a Black person in America involved understanding, all the various aspects of the oppression that we experience, whether it be, all of them fused together, converging as race, class, gender, sexuality, and and other forms of discrimination as well. So that was my entrance, I think, Anthony Mukasa, to struggle. Now, I should also say, in the time that we have, I went to Hiram College. I was fortunate to be able to get into Hiram College in Hiram, Ohio. And in 1965 and 66, on our campus, we began to learn more and more about what was going on in the Black student movement in the southern states. And in 1965 and 66, that was the period where we created in Hiram College something that we called the Alliance for Black Consciousness as an organization to begin to educate ourselves, because there was considerable unevenness of understanding amongst us about the conditions as well as the forms of resistance that we were showing in other parts of the country, indeed in other parts of the world. You asking about my high school experience, what I would say is that, as a result of being in a segregated town of Ohio, the capital, my high school experience basically reflected that same kind of situation. The one bright spot in my high school experience that I would underscore was that we had a white basketball coach who, although he never called himself an anti-racist, he understood at some very basic level that there was no way you could win in life, with people being pitted against each other as races. And so he challenged and encouraged us on our team to play for each other. And that's the way he forced us to practice. He took us to cities where we scrimmaged people that we had never met before. He took us all over Ohio. And the end result of all that was that we fused together a team and we won the state championship in 1965. Now, the athletic aspect is not all that significant anymore, but what he taught us about being open to the idea of working with people who are different from you was, it spoke volumes, and it helped to lay the groundwork for further development further along. So that's how I ended up, once I got out of South High School, graduated from South High School. And of course, let me just say this. I think that I was very privileged and very fortunate to be reared in a working class home where my parents had such a a deliberate and determined mindset about having me and my sister be a credit to our people. And what that meant to them in part was that they wanted us to study. They wanted us to be two people who would pursue intellectual excellence. But at the same time, I just have to relate this, and I know that Mukasa will be able to readily relate to this. The day I went to college, my father was in the car waiting on me. He had packed and put the bags in the car. And my mother stopped me. She said, son, there's three things I want you to understand before you go to school. I said, all right, mama. She said, the first thing is, don't forget to pray. Second thing is, study hard. And now the third thing, and I want to hit you with this, Mukasa. My mother said to me, the third thing is, don't you come back here an educated fool. That was her way. She did not, now Anthony, she did not talk about class tension. She didn't talk about class contradictions. But what she was putting her finger on was some of the experience that we had growing up in Columbus, Ohio, between folks who were more privileged than some other Black folk on the east side. We all stuck on the Black side of town, but some of us had better houses than others. And some of us had degrees and some of us didn't, okay? And my mother was very sensitive to the fact that some people thought they were living large and they were trying to become more respectable in the eyes of white folk. And they wanted all of us to be that way. And my mother said, don't you come back here an educated fool. Don't you ever think that you can be better than other people by lording it over them. And my father chimed in and he said, just remember this. On your way up, the people that you dismiss and don't like and talk about and act like you think you better than they are because you got some kind of degree, those are the same people you see on the way down when you fall. And so my parents made it very clear to me in their own way, without even talking about class tensions and class contradictions, they helped me to understand that I had to, if I was going to be a credit to Black people, that I had to now understand that I'm one of the people myself and that I'm not better than anybody else. And the idea is, they didn't say this, but this is what they meant. You remember that in the women's club movement, the Black women's club movement, there was a motto. The motto was lifting as we climb. That was the message that my mother and my father sent me to college with. And so that's how I ended up in college, at Hiram College. And that's how I ended up starting to work in the Upward Bound program. We had something called an Upward Bound program there. And the Upward Bound program, as you may know, was part of the so-called war on poverty. I call it so-called because, as Mukasa knows very well, while the liberals were putting together these programs to keep us from having long, hot summers, they were not really talking about ending poverty in the United States. They were talking about Band-Aid kinds of solutions that would make white folks feel more comfortable, and it would allow a few more of us to get into what they call the middle class. But for the vast majority of us, the poverty programs simply left us in poverty. So it was a complicated kind of development, but maybe that's where I should stick a pin for right now. That's right about now. I hadn't graduated from college, which I graduated finally in '69, but that's probably enough for right now.
Incredible. I mean, a few things. Dr. Joyce King, who we had on last episode, Georgia State University professor, graduate of Stanford, California native, talks about when she went to Stanford and how she had this conversation in front of her white roommates. Her grandmother had called her, and when she got off, her classmate said, "I didn't understand a word you said." And she talked about how she was afraid of losing that connection to home. After graduating, what if she went home and her grandmother was the one who could understand her? And so I appreciate that educated fool inclusion, because that connects to what we're talking about in this space, is that some Black folks, all kinfolk, all skin folk and kinfolk, unfortunately. And Gwinnett, one of my comrades and mentors who I have on the show, she calls them nappy headed Negroes. I won't say her name, but that's what she calls, and that's a quote, folks. Please, it's a quote. It's a quote. I didn't say any names, but also, Mukasa, you talk about loving people, our people especially, despite their brainwashing, despite how they succumb to the capitalist ideology, despite their confusion with the role of white supremacy, despite what they do, you talk about loving them. You use, and you have shared this quote in the past, cure the sickness, not the patient, right? And so this is a great connection. And so talk to us, Mukasa, if you can jump in. What are the distinctions? And this is important for us as we fight classroom censorship, and attacks on learning, and attacks on voting rights, and attacks on our communities today. What's the difference between organizing and mobilizing?
Well, mobilizing, you get together for a day or two and go back to where you came from. And Ella Baker encouraged us to organize, and otherwise you go in, you create an organization, or go and permanent organization, create a leadership for that organization, and that organization become a spokesman and a movement itself, and it go on and on and on. It's something that lasts. And mobilization, you, like Dr. King and them, bring people together for a day or two or a week and have thousands out there. And then when those people disperse, they never see them again. And so that's mobilizing, but organizing when you put together permanent groups and what have you. Now, going back to something else you said, is this love and whatever. I mean, I love all these people, but we have to fight against reactionary ideals and philosophy and behavior without mercy. And we have to destroy reactionary ideals. And that those people that are reactionary and work in the interest of the enemy, we have to destroy what they're doing, and that destruction come in many forms and in many ways. And like you mentioned Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela turned out to be a puppet for those white races in South Africa. And that they got him out of jail and fronted like he was the president, but he was what we call Uncle Tom, in modern day, a neo-colonialist. And that they put you out there and front you, and they keep all the power and authority, the economics and what have you, and just have a president or a politician out there fronting. These people are enemies to the people, and they philosophy have to be destroyed, even if it's destroying them with that philosophy. In the Congo, you had Lumumba, Patrice Lumumba, and Lumumba was a prime minister of the Congo. The Belgium and the CIA and the United Nations and other governments, they came to destroy Lumumba. And they didn't just destroy him by themselves. They went and got people that they created, like Shumbe and Mobutu, and used these men to come and assassinate and kill Lumumba and set up what we call the neo-colonial government, and put the people in slavery and make sure that the natural resources and all the richness of that country continue to go to Belgium, Europe, and other multinational corporations. And that as they killed Lumumba, Patrice Lumumba, they killed him, chopped him up in little pieces, and put his body in acid. And all of us who hear our voice should study Lumumba, and we should look at the crimes of these multinational corporations, how they got on the lands that they own, and what they did to the people on that land, and what they continue to do to these people on all these lands, even today. I mean, commit genocide on them, starve them to death, places where it's the richest places in the world, where these multinational corporations are guided by the U.S. and the United Nations, NATO. guided by them. They're in there they're raping the land and leaving the people with absolutely nothing. Leaving the people with absolutely nothing. And that the more they crowd, the more they starve, then the more they kill them, jail them, and anybody to speak out like Dr. King or Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, many other people in the world. I'm on the phone, Africa. I'm on a Zoom, and anybody that speak out, they coup d'etat, they use militaries, and they continue to do all this. So we have Africans who look like us, but yet they operate in the interest of imperialism, operating for money, and operating for the interest of the oppressor and those who have oppressed us all the time. And they will have armies and they will work to kill us, enslave us, and whatever. So they use black faces on black people's land to carry out and fight for imperialism for them. And they got over, even the United States, and Obama was another neo-colonialist trader, Uncle Tom sellout, and that they used all these people against African people, and that we have to destroy them, and we have to destroy that whole system. And all that Democrat, Republican, all of them the same thing. And it's becoming clear that even going out to vote for these people is no longer viable. We have to take our land. We have to take Africa. We have to crush imperialism. But the number one weapon we should use or got to use is our history, our culture, and organization. And the more we organize our people on a worldwide base, the stronger we are, and the more we'll be able to fight them. So if we're going to love our people, we got to go out here in the streets and teach our people their history, their culture, their greatness, and make them love their self by looking at themselves thousands of years in history, and introduce them to the Black woman, introduce them to the Black man, and make us something that's precious that you don't want to kill, but you want to fight for. And this is what we have to do in terms of organizing our people. So our history is a very, very important weapon that we have to use. And I'm not saying that at some point, hopefully, we will have to use military and all other forms of liberation. And if we can fight in the United States Army for Europe, for the United States, for France, for Britain, for Germany, and many other people in the world, why we can't fight the United States, why we can't unite and liberate Africa. We can fight for a system that exploit us and leave us in slavery and starving to death, while we can't fight against that system. And the system that seems to be just than all other systems is scientific socialism. So we're in a revolution that, and Malcolm said, revolutions are fought for land, and Africa is our land, and that's the land that we have to fight for. And we have to join in with all the other revolutionary governments, all the revolutionary movements, all the revolutionary individuals, and come together and begin to have one philosophy and guide and work together to liberate ourselves. But we're fighting against an international worldwide monster. I think Secretary called imperialism Satan. It's Satan, and it's bad for everything on the earth, the water, the trees, the wind, the people, the animals, everything. We must destroy Satan. We must destroy imperialism together. And that man taught me about imperialism. Him and his boys took me to his class and put me in the political science class with him. And I was in there in political science class, getting my PhD and learn about international monetary systems and all those papers that they presented to me, and gave me even a better weapon to go out and fight against imperialism and explain it to the people. So I learned a lot from this African and his little crew he used to hang out with. And I got my PhD from political science department. And when I got there, I learned a lot from them. And then I realized that they didn't really know nothing. I had to go teach them.
Well, listen, you teaching us. We are in a master class, y'all, on militancy. And what is empowering for me as an abolitionist educator is that we are going through the resistance, our own resistance at this moment. And as a young person, it is encouraging to know that no, people aren't going to agree with you. No, it's not going to be easy. But if you keep on keeping on with that militancy, you don't have to turn it down to be effective. You don't have to listen to what folks are saying when they say don't be militant. And in fact, at my most previous school, after a fiery meeting about teaching decolonized history, this was a predominantly Black school. The one of our department leaders pulled me to the side and said, "Anthony, you don't have to be so militant." And I just shook my head because unfortunately, I think that was a lack of understanding of history and what it takes to challenge the system, especially oppressive systems like our educational system. You talked to us also about how we must not depend too much on this system. While we're demanding the legislation be passed and the curriculum be changed, we have to deliver Black history to our students now. We have to do it in our churches and outside the brick and mortar. We can't wait for schools to improve, because every single semester and every single year that passes without our children learning their history is an attack, a direct attack on their souls and our history. And folks, finally, when we talk about where we go as organizers, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Nothing under the sun is new. We know this, right? And so we must look to history to see how to go forward, what tactics were successful, what organizing was successful. We must celebrate our victories of the past. It is no surprise. I am unsurprised that someone like a Baba Mukasa is omitted from our curriculum. You are too radical and too militant. You would have, if we had learned about you in high school in AP US history, man, you would have turned us up, man. But that's why our living history and our history of the past is omitted, because it would set the world on fire if we knew how
Well,
we
the
could
world gonna
achieve.
be on fire, and not only that, we learned from our brothers and sisters in Haiti who led to Haitian Revolution,
Amen.
and they were
Ashe.
one of the first slaves successful rebellions. And we learned from other revolutionaries throughout the world, Fidel Castro and Muammar Gaddafi and many others. And we have to always be ready to tell that truth and present that information to them. And that's what our people is lacking: the information about who we are and our real heroes and soldiers and warriors that exist out here. And we have to stop allowing all this colonialism and imperialism and these lies that they put on us. And we have to let our people know that the dollar is just something these Europeans created and make you pray to it. You got to pray to it. You got to can't eat unless you got some of their money. Can't have a house, lights, gas, water. You got diamonds and gold. They bring you some paper saying, I'm going to give you this paper for your diamonds and gold. They got governments that sell their people out just to get some paper money from the United States. And the money of the United States is nothing but shit paper with the white man's picture on it, with the slave master's picture on it. It's nothing but toilet paper already used with the Europeans' picture on it. And how we going to trade a piece of paper that they print up for our diamonds and gold and oil and silver and copper and pearl and cobalt, manganese and water and all the different things exist, our labor. We should not put nothing before that. And if we take over Africa, take over our diamonds and gold, we can get anything we want. We want our big diamonds, our gold, our silver, our platinum that's in the ground in our motherland, and we must defend it. And so we don't need the white man shit paper to kill ourselves on, rob ourselves on, but we need our history to teach us to love each other, love our hair, our nose, our lips, our skin, and have respect for each other. And then again, we need to do as much research and study on the political level and on the social level in terms of our history and where we're going and where we have been. In order to know where you're going, you got to know where you've been. And this is why The study of our history is good. And no, I don't believe in the politics anymore. I don't believe in voting and all that. I think that we need to be like the Chinese, go take our shit, march forward with our army. We need to help Putin, help Russia fight against imperialism. We need to be anti-war, anti-United States war and warmongering around the world. We need to get organized. We need to have Pan-Africanism, the unity of all African people. And we definitely have to endorse Castro's philosophy in Cuba, socialism, scientific socialism, where you take everything that the rich people got and give it back to the poor. We don't need, and everybody, shouldn't be no price on no water, lights, gas, shelter, housing. All that should be free. Education, medicine, all that. And this is the kind of things that we're talking about. And these are the kind of people that we're looking for and looking to in the world. And that's what this man taught me when they took me to his classes in political science. McKinney, you remember Dr. McKinney? Dr. McKinney and all of them. I went to their classes with them, and I would come out, they would write these sophisticated papers, giving all that information about systems in government and IMF and all that. And I would get that information and run out to class and go stand on the table in Morehouse and tell all the children over there about it. And anyway, this is what we have to do. And we have to teach. I didn't have the information that they had. I didn't have the ability to do the research they did. They would do the research, pass it to me, and then I'll go pass it to the students and other students, and went out through the school, knocking on every door in the dormitory, telling them about the IMF, telling them about imperialism and whatever, and telling them about socialism. And this is what we have to do. We have to educate each other and then go out to our children in the streets and pass that education to them.
That's right, man. Listen, you have empowered me, and I know that I'm on the right path as an educator, as someone who is currently helping support schools, but with the ultimate vision that we can build better schools, we can build a better system for our Black scholars. And so this has been a North Star for me, and this is affirming too, because for many of us who are younger and on fire at such a young age, so many people think that this has come out of nowhere. You're making this up. You're doing this for you. No. First of all, there has been something deeply embedded within our DNA and our souls that connects us to our ancestors and our elders who have done this work. That's number one. And then number two, of course, we can't stand by while injustice happens. And within each passing generation, as you can see, the rage grows, and the activists are getting younger and younger, because we will not allow this world to continue on its current path. And so one way that you're doing that, Brother Iverson, is, of course, connecting us and connecting the past to the present, the older generations to the newer ones, through the Black Men in Unions collective. So can you talk to us about that work and what that looks like pursuant to this idea around organizing rather than mobilizing? Uh-oh, looks like you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Yes, my answer is yes. But let me try to draw what I believe is a very important link between the total struggle for liberation that Mukasa is describing and something that Ella Baker used to teach about, when she would say that strong people don't need strong leaders. And I want to connect those two with what Amilcar Cabral, the great revolutionary from Guinea-Bissau and the Sao Tome Islands, who was assassinated by the very kind of turncoats and opportunists that Mukasa was describing earlier. As a revolutionary who was very serious about educating his people, Amilcar Cabral used to say, "Tell no lies, claim no easy victories." So what's the connection between Amilcar Cabral Ella Baker and Total Revolutionary Struggle to liberate people of African descent, to liberate all the oppressed people of the world, to liberate the planet. We have to be able to build relationships. This comes back down. I mean, Mukasa was giving us the sweep of a global vision of radical transformation. That's great. We now have to bring it back down to the micro level where we build relationships with other people, because mobilizing is something that we have gotten into in this country, where we put a lot of emphasis, too much emphasis, on celebrity, too much emphasis on episodic struggle. What I mean by that is too much emphasis on getting people to be more active in the streets. It's fine for people to be in the streets, but people must understand why they are in the streets. And the question becomes then, how do we get them from their homes to the streets, especially in a period of time when we have so many distractions? You don't even have to go to movies anymore. For me, growing up in Columbus, Ohio, going to the movies was a big thing. People don't need to go to the movies anymore. They just go to Netflix on their devices. My point is that we are in a different kind of environment, and yet the needs for understanding of relationship building have never been more important. We have to build the kinds of relationships in 2023 that Mukasa, Stokely, Diane Nash, Ella Baker, C.T. Vivian, and others were trying to build during the 1950s and 60s. It is the relationship building that we do with one another that allows each of us to begin to see ourselves, himself and herself, as the agent of social change for whom we have been waiting. Someone who's listening to this podcast or viewing this podcast will say, well, I can't ever be like Mukasa, because of all the things that Mukasa has said he has done. And we know he has done every last one of those things he has done. But one does not have to become like Mukasa. One has to understand that if you have a desire for change, you are the agent of change that you think Mukasa has become. Now the challenge is for me, as Leroy 00 Soul Buckwheat Johnson, to know that I can become like Mukasa as an agent of change, that I can begin to think and act the way folks began to think and act to deal with neighborhood situations, the very kind of problems that Ella Baker would help people to understand. You go to a local area, you find out what the people say is the problem. You don't come in with your own agenda and try to tell them what they should be doing. I don't care how radical you think you are, you have to build a relationship with the people, and you have to understand what they think is important. Once you understand that, and once you begin to help them see themselves as an agent of change, now together we can figure out what we need to do in this situation. Do we need a demonstration? Do we need a letter campaign? Do we need sit-ins? What do we need? The question is, the form of struggle will come out of the understanding of what the struggle is all about. But it's the relationship that I have with you and you have with me and we have with our neighbors that allows us to make the struggle something that we're all conscious of. I hope I'm making some sense, because the connection I see with this relationship building, that is the heart of organizing. If you just are talking about getting people out, Mukasa said it about 15, 20 minutes ago. You get people out in the street and then they go home. It was nice while they were in the street. We made a lot of noise. What do people learn about what we did in the street? How did we get to the street? Is the street just something that we're going to try to repeat next week? Or maybe we need to have our tactics change. What's our understanding of the form of the struggle that we need and the struggles and the problems that we're trying to solve. And if the problems in Mississippi, in Jackson, are similar to the problems in Highland Park, which is inside of Detroit, Michigan, if those problems are the same that people in New Orleans are facing, how do we begin to create a struggle when we understand the connection between those struggles? How do we begin to understand the systemic nature, the systemic nature, the systematic and systemic nature of what we are dealing with, whether it's in Highland Park, where people are fighting for the right to water, and they're fighting against emergency management. How do we connect those folks with the folks in Jackson, Mississippi, who are fighting a very similar kind of struggle? The organizing has to be such that the education fits what's happening to us, and we can not only connect with who we live next to, but we can also begin to see how there's a similarity between what's happening in one area where Black people are and what's happening somewhere else. And if we begin with that kind of approach and not just trying to get people out in the street, I don't mean to dismiss the idea of people being in the street. That's not what I'm talking about. But I am very concerned that in 2023, we have too much emphasis on celebrities. We have too much emphasis on doing things like voting. And when I say this, please help, let me make this clear. I will vote. I don't think, Mukasa and I may have a tactical difference on this, but I think voting is important. But it's within the context where you have to vote. What's the situation? Is voting going to end all of our oppression? No, it's not. It's not going to end everything that we're dealing with. And it may not even get us somebody, if we're not careful, we get the wrong person. We voted for Obama. I worked for Obama in his first election run, and then came to regret what I had done, because my wife and I began to understand that Obama was not just elected, he was selected. And there were people who vetted him, and they knew that he would present an agenda that was not only for the Democratic Party, but for the most elite people in this country. And now the challenge is, how do we get people who went through that experience to become more conscious about what actually happened? So the organizing that we have to do in front of us, Brother Anthony and Brother Mukasa, and you know this, Mukasa, to get to the point where we're going to fight injustice wherever it shows itself, we have to help people become the agents of change that they have been waiting on.
Wow. Preaching and teaching. I am full, y'all. I'm filled up by my brothers. Thank you again to Baba Mukasa and Brother Iverson. Thank you so much for all that they brought to the space. And thank you so much for giving us the history we have to ensure gets passed down to the next generation. Y'all, they already gave you a call to action. There was plenty said, so I don't want to add on anything else. But if you can take what they applied and apply it to your issue area, to your passion, to your community, we were going to be better for it. Coming up, y'all, this week is National Library Week. Shout out to our librarians, our media clerks, our library workers. We stand in solidarity with you during this time of fascist attacks on our books, our works of literature, on our curriculum and instruction. We will fight back. We are 1 week out from May 3rd. That's National Freedom to Learn Day of Action. Liberation Learning, Teach for Freedom Collective, and so many partners across the state are joining the African American Policy Forum to stand in solidarity with educators, students, library workers, and more to resist the attack on Black literature and literacy. Tune in on Wednesday, May 3rd at 7:30 p.m. on Facebook Live. We'll share the details, of course, on our social media to read some of the books that have been banned in Georgia. That's from The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. There's All Boys Aren't Blue by George Johnson, Anne Frank's Diary. There's Milk and Honey. There's Dear Martin, and so many other selections. And so shout out to the organizers that are helping put us that event together. We also are still selling Power of Our Stories Won't Stop. Check out your local bookstore to get that anthology that presents narratives connected to our history. And then our last conversation, our season finale, is next month, May 17th. That's Wednesday, May 17th at 7 p.m. Same place, same time. That's the last episode of the season. Not only that, it's also our last episode on this platform, Educational Entities. We are going to go out with a bang. We are so excited for the transition and so grateful to our comrades right here in this space. Next season, beginning with season 4 and beyond, we will be in our own space, Liberation Learning. We are going to transition all of our services, everything there, and so have some exciting expansion ideas coming up. Plug in and stay tuned with us. You know where to find us for all things liberatory learning. That's Liberation Learning on Facebook and at Hello Liberation on Instagram. You all have been an amazing audience. Thank you for another fantastic evening plugging in with our guest, Ashe. Take care, peace, love, and blessings.